What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio is world-renowned psychic Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony. Today our show revolves around magic. It's a very popular topic, but we're not talking about Harry Houdini or David Copperfield. We're speaking about the real magic that goes back for centuries. Now, on this episode, we're sharing the magical worlds of the Norse goddess.
Author Alice Karlsdottir is here to uplift and educate our audience with a practical guide to the magic of the feminine side of the Norse pantheon.
Alice is the author of Norse Goddess Magic. It's all about trance work, mythology, and ritual. She's been involved in the dramatic heathen revival for over 40 years, and she's also a student of the Scandinavian and Northern European methodologies and folklores. Plus, guess what, Tony?
What's that, Eddie?
Alice is a practicing Norse pagan, which makes it that much more fun for our audience.
Nice. And if that's not enough, Alice is a Master in Rune Guild, which is an initiation organization for the teaching and research of rune lore and rune work. She also contributes to dozens of articles with lots of publications.
Of course she does, because in her spare time, she's continuing to do her trance work and her paganism, and she's always empowering people all over the world. But tonight, Alice gives us details about her trance work to discover the personalities and the powers of Frigg, the Allmother, wife of Odin, and the 12 lesser-known Aesir goddesses associated with her. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our very special guest, famed author and practicing Norse pagan, Alice Karlsdottir.
Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi, Alice. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
We are so excited to have you here, and it's going to be a great show because this is a subject we've not touched on before, and that's one thing about Truth Be Told. We want to know, we want to learn from people like yourself that have put your passion and energy and research.
And if you've
into
never
this.
met Tony, you know he likes to touch on everything.
We won't touch on that subject right now. Well, first of all, thank you for being here. And I want to know a little bit about your background since you have not been on the show before. Tell us about how you got into the field that you're in now. And I think actually just tell us the field that you actually specialize in.
Well, I became a practicing Norse pagan because my mother's side of the family came from Norway, and because they had come more recently than my father's family came from England, they had a lot of the old traditions still, and I picked up a lot of I learned the myths when I was about 4 or 5, because I remember my mother reading them to me before I could read myself. And those were like the Norse myths were the first ones I ever read. So I think a lot of people compare them to like the Greek or Roman myths. But for me, I read the Norse ones first, so I compared everything else to that, like when I was in school. And I was raised in a Lutheran church in a nice middle-class neighborhood in Texas. But when I hit high school and college, I was dissatisfied with that, and I started looking around at a lot of different religions and just exploring what was out there. And when I discovered there was such a thing as paganism, I immediately wanted to work with the Norse pantheon because I felt close to them already just from, picking up the folklore when I was a child. So that's how I kind of got into it. There wasn't very much. There was no internet way back then.
Right.
And, And there weren't a lot of books or magazines on that particular area of paganism, although they were starting, it was kind of before the New Age, but there were books on ceremonial magic and Wicca and maybe Celtic to some extent. But there wasn't a lot out there, but what there was, I would read about it. I read a lot of scholarly works because there wasn't a lot of popular pagan works on that, in that area, and there weren't very many people doing it, or it was hard to find them. But I wound up working with a small group of people. We called ourselves Okrun Circle back in the 70s and 80s, and met a teacher. His name was David James, who introduced me to the runes and a number of magic, a lot of magical techniques.
Now,
I've just kind of been going along ever since then.
Well, let me ask you this, and there's a lot of people out there. There's a saying I'm looking at right now: accusing a pagan of worshiping Satan is like an atheist worshiping God, because pagan, there's a lot of misconceptions, and and I want to, if you can explain what pagan is to our audience.
Well, different. There is not just one kind of paganism because people work with different traditions, but basically it's a non-Christian religion, usually based on the mythology or religious practices of some ethnic group or historical group of people. Because before Christianity, most places in the world had some sort of pagan religion. The Celts had Druidism, the Norse worshiped their gods. And not just, I don't know about everywhere in the world, and there's some places that still have that. I would say in some ways Hinduism is kind of, they've become a world religion, but a lot. So it's basically usually a pre-Christian religion of some people or area, because paganism is not. I think we're so used to the idea of world religions or the religions that this is the one way to reach God and everyone should practice it. That pagan religions, when they started out, were usually practiced by a certain tribe. It could be as small as just a tribe or a region or a group of people who worship their gods, and some other group of people, across the mountains might worship different gods, in different countries, and that's it was kind of considered okay. I don't think people expected other tribes or groups of people to be worshiping, their gods, that it was, necessary that, So it's kind of like different. There's a lot of different pagan religions, a lot of modern, certain magic or different practices sometimes stem out of an indigenous people's pagan religions.
Well, and you said you grew up in Texas, and that's a super conservative state.
It is in some ways, but there's also a lot of. There was Austin in the 60s and 70s is kind of a liberal place.
Oh, wow.
There are a lot of ethnic groups in Texas. I had a friend in New York that said she didn't know there were any ethnic groups in Texas, but there were a lot because it's a large state. I think unlike a city like New York, instead of all being crowded in the same city, they were spread out into little towns. And in fact, a lot of the groups, were very self-contained in these little isolated towns and continued practicing, whatever folklore that they brought from their country for a long time. So there's a lot of interesting folk customs and remnants. There are customs that seem like remnants of what I believe are pagan things that have kind of, been brought over from the old world that people don't really know that they are pagan, but they kind of are. An example is there's a town called Fredericksburg they used to have, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have fires at Easter, to which they'd burn bonfires in the surrounding hills. And I read somewhere that the legend was that was the Easter Bunny boiling eggs, but in fact the German pagan tribes and Scandinavia too would build big bonfires on, the eve before their spring, festival. And I mean, they might have rationalized it to themselves as they became Christian, but I'm pretty sure those customs probably go way back, in Germany or where that,
I'm
because
sure,
the Germans settled that town, and then they brought it over to Fredericksburg, So.
Which it's fascinating because at an early age you were able to create a circle in that part of the country. So this is very educational for us because you think of Texas and it's like run everybody out that ain't like us.
Yes, it is. Actually, the group, when we actually formed the group, we were in Connecticut by that time. But
because you got out.
This is a funny story though, because I went to a Southern Baptist university.
Oh wow! You did too, Eddie?
Not a university.
Yeah, I know. I was
kind
of. I don't know how I wound up there. And I was a theater major, which was like.
Yeah. Oh God.
It was kind of fun because I was like a nerdy good girl growing up, and just the fact that I was majoring in theater and wasn't a Baptist was kind of exciting and dangerous to my fellow students. And it's always fun when you're 18 to be that way without having to really do anything dangerous or too bad. So I kind of enjoyed being, a wild girl at Baylor. Anyway, while I was there, I met my teacher, my magical pagan, who became my, guru or my teacher, and my priest at this university, who is an adjunct professor who was teaching like a year of poetry, who had come down from Yale University. So like you think about, how you encounter, people you're meant to meet or teachers, like you can find them in the most unlikely places. And I did theater. I majored in theater, so I did theater, and we were separated after I graduated college, and I wound up in the Northeast at a summer theater and encountered him again, and some of the people, and then at that point we formed our circle. So.
Nice.
Well, I when I was in my 20s, also I did the round, doing the rounds of different religions and Buddha, Hindu, all that stuff. Well, I grew up around that stuff.
I did too.
Yeah,
I did too.
So I didn't have to search that that one out.
They came to me knocking on the door.
Right.
You need a cleansing.
Blah blah blah. But I want to know, when you met this teacher, how did you know? Was it like an intuition? Was it like the light bulb went off that just really lit up the room that says this is something I really want to seek?
I had been kind of drawn. It's kind of like come here, go away. Had this on-off interest in magic and the occult, paganism, but then when there wasn't much information, like I said, and certainly like where I was being so young, there wasn't access to good information. So I'd kind of go to the library or, bookstore and kind of look, in that section, and they'd have these books on, evil Satanist magic, and then it was like, no, I don't want to do that. So I'd kind of, get turned off, and I kind of really didn't know what paganism was, but I was kind of, I guess, drawn to it. And one of the things that meeting David did for me is he had a large library on all kinds of ceremonial magic and, various pagan groups. It was mostly Wiccan books or various things being published at that time, but just the idea that there was such a thing as paganism, that was not some kind of evil magic, but was this religion, was kind of the aha moment, I guess. It's like, oh, this is a thing,
Well,
this is what it is, and then and then immediately it's like, and I, because I'd always, I loved the Norse gods when I was a kid, and then I got older, and it's like, well, these are just stories, but I'm an adult now. Of course, I don't believe in it, but it was almost like the minute I discovered that there were such things as pagan religions, it's like, yes, they are real. These are the ones I want to worship. So.
Well, growing up, for me, I didn't hear much about the Norse gods. I don't know about you, Eddie, but I mean, we heard about the Greek and Roman, but I didn't hear much about the Norse gods.
Yeah. Same
It'll
here.
be a little chapter at the back of your mythology section if they talk about it at all.
That's
Right.
right. Yeah, well, then they don't like to talk. My teacher, literally, I remember we did 1 week in 1 semester of the Greek and Roman gods, and we had to do an exam on it. She's like, now, I don't want to be talking about these people because there's some homosexuality that was involved in the Greek and the Roman empires.
Oh, no.
And then here I am, big old sissy Eddie, sitting in
We
the
all know
classroom.
about those Greeks.
I know it's just like, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'm Greek. I don't know. I didn't know what was wrong with me.
Well, and I don't even know if they still teach mythology in school
And I bet
anymore
they
because
don't.
I know they
doubt.
started protesting it. You know,
Yeah, I doubt. I
That
mean,
is
to
ridiculous.
me, it's part of history. I think it's important to know all aspects of history. So,
Well, they like to rewrite it so
Well,
that it
true.
sounds like they make it what they want to make it now instead of what
Medusa
the
is
truth
just called Aunt Mildred.
Yeah, we
and
all
it
got
really
it.
gives you a clue as to how people in a certain time thought because you can kind of see how they think about their society by the way they picture their gods and their relationships. You know.
Well, let's talk about this with your book, Norse Goddess Magic, Trancework, Mythology, and Ritual. I want to find out what is trancework. I'm not familiar with that. Eddie, I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
All I see now, Alice, you're gonna have to educate me, honey, okay? Because all I know about as a psychic and a tiny petite flower princess, giver goddess medium myself, that trance channeling, there's conscious channeling, there's trance channeling. So I would just guess, not being educated, that trance work would be getting into that higher altered
meditation-ish?
state of consciousness that's almost trance-like to do certain work.
That's right. Very
Oh,
good.
good
Oh,
for
my
you, Eddie. Wait a
God.
minute. I got to give Eddie this because
Yay.
good for you, Eddie.
Yay!
You get a biscuit.
I do, and I like biscuits. Thank you, Alice. So tell us about how you got involved with the trance work.
So continuing on my story, when we formed this group and started doing rituals, we like to do a both gods and goddesses, and there is a lot of information on a number of the Norse gods, but there's not very much information on very many of the Norse goddesses. And I usually wound up writing like the invocations or, you know, the stuff about that. And so I had this problem that I was having to create ritual text about a deity that I didn't really know what they were, so I would like research it, and there wouldn't be very much in the books. And I had a light bulb that, I mean, someone decided somewhere in the past what the gods were like, you know, what any of these figures were like. And it just seemed like there must be a way to kind of contact, if you believe gods are real, you should be able to contact them again and try to find out who they are or what they're like if you can't read information. I don't mean you should just use trance work because some people get so into trance that they believe whatever they see in a trance and kind of ignore. And you know what I mean? It's like not everything in your own trance is necessarily going to be true, but combined with like research on there is some historical information on the gods and other information, which I describe that process in the book too. And by combining the two together and even working with other people, you know, and kind of getting a consensus of, you know, what their trance experience was compared to yours, you can maybe try to come to an understanding with the gods, and also an emotional relationship, you know, that's not just the dry reading about gods. I have heard explained that ritual is calling gods from where they are into your space, into the ritual. And trance-working is kind of taking yourself from your space to try to reach the world of the gods. You can use the trance techniques are a way to get into a trance to do other work, as you said. And you can use it. You can go into a trance for all kinds of things, certain kinds of magic, divination. But in this case, what I'm describing in the book is doing a process that's called, for lack of a better word, you could think of it as there is in the Old Norse that they did practice certain types of magic that involved trance activities as described in the books. And one thing that they would do is fare forth, F-A-R-E, forth, or go forth. Sometimes they would fare forth in the form of an animal to do magic or something. So in this, I'm kind of taking a journey where I put myself into a trance state and try to send part of my psyche out on this journey to contact, in this case, these goddesses, to try to meet them and talk to them and get to know them, just get some sense of who or what they are.
And so how, not to go into age, but how old were you when you first achieved your first deep trance and you came out of it and you're like, oh, Lord, child, I want to make love to myself. That was so good.
Well, and that's the thing. I was probably in, I started doing it in the 80s, maybe in my late 20s, early 30s. I was actually, and people use various trance working because there's different states of trance that people use for different things. And a lot of pagans do various things with types of trance. And you would go to pagan festivals and sometimes people would do workshops or they would do a trance working for the group. And I actually used to not be that good at going into trance. Because some people they do a few things and they immediately go into a trance, and I would be sitting there like, And I decided that I just wasn't, I was one of those people that couldn't do it, is what I decided. But I was actually in an acting workshop in New York City later, and there was a hypnotist there that was doing some kind of workshop. I don't remember what it had to do with acting, but he kind of did some trance induction techniques, and some people in the audience, he would say, now try to raise your hand, and they would be in a trance and unable to raise their hand. And then he did a few more things, and then some more people, were in a trance. And some of us weren't. And what he told us is that there were so many steps, to getting into hypnosis, and that everyone could be hypnotized, but some people took more steps than others. So that was like an aha moment, and I thought maybe if I, read a lot about trance induction techniques, and tried doing it on my own longer than, these groups had done it, that maybe I would be able to get into a trance. And I did. I eventually got to where it doesn't take me that long, and I'm actually better at it. But one of the reasons I started reading about it, and, I'd do it like an experiment in high school chemistry, where I would note the time of the month and the time of day and what the weather was, because I was trying to figure out what, if there were conditions that made it easier to go into a trance than others, and, conditions that interfered with it. And I kind of went, I'd kind of do it once or twice a month. And I came up with, a bunch of techniques for doing it. And I think if I had been very easily put into a trance, I wouldn't have ever had to bother finding out, I wouldn't have had to think about how to tell someone to go into a trance, and I probably would not have written this book. But because I had to go through this whole process of research and experimentation before I, kind of got the hang of it, then I feel like this is for people who might need some help going into a trance, not for people who can just do it naturally without, worrying about it.
And I want to ask you this because I remember Eddie and I went to take Lisa Williams. She's a world-renowned medium, one of her classes. And there, I went as an observer, and I learned a lot that I had my own intuition and I had my own psychic abilities that I didn't even know. And the same with what you're talking about, trance, about receiving information, if it's genuine or is it just popping into your head? Well, is that one and the same? Because I know with what mediumship or psychic, and I'll ask you, Eddie, is when you get that information, isn't that really, even if you think it's kind of BS, that it's really what, just say what you're seeing? Is that right? I mean, or talk about what you're feeling or seeing in the trance that you're doing or getting. Is that right? The information?
To some degree, I guess what I'm talking about is sometimes, you have your own preconceptions
right.
and things, and and I usually, I will write down whatever. I'd make a record, of, say what I'm seeing, but then I usually look at it later. And I also, like I said, I made a record of all these conditions, and I would also note down books I'd been reading, or if I saw like a TV show or a movie, like right before I went into trance,
Right.
sometimes those so sometimes you will see in trance things that when you think about it after you're out of trance, you realize might be influenced by, that you had a fight with your
Okay,
friend
right.
on the phone, or that you were, you saw all 3 Star Wars movies that day before you did a trance or whatever.
Right.
Because that does influence. So, like, I write it down, and I usually do a trance working to the same goddess, like, multiple times, or at least a few times. And I compare that against what I do know from the lore, and just by kind of combining my own personal prejudices, as it were, and thoughts, that sometimes I'll weed up some things that I realize later when I do the trance again aren't, don't quite hold water. But
It's
and there are things in trances, and when I'm talking about that too, some people will, if you see certain certain things in a trance, it might be images that mean something to you, but that doesn't mean that everybody else should see that goddess the same way, because that might not mean the same thing to them. One of the goddesses I heard with a Texas country accent, and I later when I thought about it and research, and kind of reviewed her, that it was saying something about her, that she was down to earth and kind of plain spoken. And if I had been from England, I might have heard her with a North Country accent. But
Yeah.
it's not like she's from Texas. But that it was kind of like dream images almost. Like you'll see things that mean something on a subjective, or an unconscious level.
Well, and I like how, because I live in a woo-woo world. I do. I'm grounded to be an intuitive. I used to have my head in the clouds, and I didn't like being in a human body and all of that stuff. And everything was right brain for me. It was creative. It was artistic. I was just sort of like, follow your dreams. Oh, I got to pay rent. And you have an extraordinary balance. It seems like I like your logistical approach. I like the aspects that are cerebral, where you're got the log of everything. I watched 3 episodes of Star Wars. Oh, that's why I dreamt I was dressed like Princess Leia. And then also you've got the great intuitive aspect of it. So I like the way that you're going into this. And now I'm curious, can you drop into a trance state much faster now? Or meaning, do you have like triggers or things you can use to just like get right into it?
I do it much better now. And I was going to just throw out that one of the things I learned in this whole process is that I really thought trance was something like, I don't know, some kind of talent, or some people, like, you either could do it or you couldn't. And what I learned is that it actually is something that can be learned and improved with practice, like playing the piano, or like a sport, that was a surprise to me. I didn't really. I know some people have natural ability, without working at it to do it. But if you don't, you can actually train yourself, or to get better at it. So that was kind of exciting.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of people that literally go into a trance state, and I'm not being silly. I am totally being serious. I could be driving down the road, not now because I'm on a diet, okay, Alice? But there was a time where I could be driving down the road listening to music. A commercial comes on the radio. They start spouting off something about Ben and Jerry's, or some Keebler elf and some new fudge dip cookie with M&Ms glued to them that you dip with a Kit Kat into a bowl of ice cream. And the next thing I know, on my way home, I am standing in the cookie aisle with that bag of cookies in my hand. And I know I'm highly suggestible and a little strange, but a lot of people can go into these sort of automatic, hypnotic kind of trances if they don't pay attention, if they don't learn to direct their consciousness. Is that true or false?
Yeah, I've met some people that said they had that experience. And I guess that's one of the reasons I felt like, well, I can't do that, so I can't ever do trance working. But,
Yeah, be glad that you can't do it, because I jumped up to 236.1 pounds.
And they had the opposite problem of having to learn to ground themselves.
Yeah, and that's well stated.
Yeah.
And I will say the kind of trance working, there's different types, which I talk about in the book. But what I'm doing here it is kind of directed and focused. I'm not just opening my mind and letting whatever happens. I usually do it as part of a ritual. These particular trances were done to contact a certain goddess. I've used it with gods later. But, I usually do a ritual and kind of to and it's kind of setting up like, okay, I'm trying to get your attention, and now I'm going to try to meet you, and that's kind of my intent. So, and then that's what I usually do, sometimes with less success, but it is kind of a directed consciousness in this case, rather than just wide open to. It's not like scrying or some things where you just kind of open your mind and let try to see what happens. Type of thing.
Well, and so tell us one of your high points. One of the like when you went in and you came out and you were like, Lord, have mercy. I mean, something where you were just blown away, that got confirmed for you in a way that just continued to solidify the trance work and what you do.
Well, a couple of things. One eye-opener was I did the trance work. One of the first ones mentioned in the book after Frigg is Eir, E-I-R, who is the goddess of healing, because the Norse had a goddess of healing rather than a god. And in the ritual, I saw some things happen to do with another god called Ttir, and it seemed like there was some kind of connection between them. And then, so I wrote that down, and, that he's a warrior, so, he might need healing, so, that kind of made sense. And then later, I was not doing research on Eir, but I was just looking at something in some book, and there were some transcriptions from pagan Germany when they had contact with part of Germany was part of the German states were part of the Roman Empire at various times, and it was some carvings on a stone that actually was some of the things that I had seen in my trance. So that was like, well, this is pretty real because it's carved in stone, as they say. So that was pretty exciting to have something you saw in a trance then confirmed by an actual archaeological find or object. And the other thing is I at one of these pagan festivals where I had done a trance working and actually had more success than I usually did, I just had this very vivid image of a goddess figure. And years later, I finally was doing a trance working and working with a particular Norse goddess. And when I was in the trance, I realized that had been her, but I didn't know it at the time. I wasn't familiar with that figure. So that was kind of neat to finally have a name to put with that.
And thank you for that. We love the grounded stuff. Now, let me tell you what's happening over here with Tony and I. First of all, there is a fruit fly flying around us.
And Eddie looks like he's going crazy. He's like flipping his hands to the air.
And then Tony's looking at me like, what's your problem? And because this is radio, yes, but it's also video. So a lot of people are seeing us. And then there's two fruit flies, and they're, of course, coming over to me. So evidently I'm the bigger gay of the two of us. And then I'm trying to swat it away and be all cool and professional. And then Tony's trying to get me to read this thing about how is trance working related to the magical practice of sorcery. But I couldn't pronounce the F-S-E-I-O-R. And then so we're just like fending off fruit flies, and then we're cracking up because we can't keep a straight face. So when you go back and watch the video, we just want you to know how much fun and light your energy is.
We love it. We love it because we're learning a lot.
Yeah, but so you see, I literally have to slide out of the screen because one flew in my eye. So we just want you to know what's happening over here on our end.
But how do you pronounce it? It's the Nordic term, Old Norse term for a type of sorcery. But how do you?
I think you're talking about it's SEI.
O.
It looks like a D with a little line through the top of it. It's a phonetical word. It's a letter. It's called ed, and it's the sound the, voiced the.
Oh.
They used to have, instead of TH, they used to actually have a separate letter for that sound.
The SEIOR?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you
say it? Scythe.
Scythe.
I would have never even got that.
I know.
Sometimes you'll hear it pronounced scythe. Of course, nobody really knows how Old Norse was pronounced. But I think now linguists kind of have veered toward the scythe pronunciation. Sometimes people pronounce it seethe, and that is not the way it was ever.
I wouldn't even come close.
And that's the other thing. We're cracking up because if you could hear us pre-recording the intros to people's shows,
words and
saying like all kinds of these words and I'm like, Tony always gives me the hard words. And so then he's got on the screen here to ask this question. So this is how it read. How is trance working related to the magical practice, the letter F space SEIOR?
Because I misspelled it.
After all of that, Alice, you're the most patient pagan
on
planet
We love
Earth.
it. We love you for that.
So here's the question: how is trance working related to the magical practice of sorcery? So he left out the OF this time.
Well, like I said, there's rune magic, and we know there's a magical alphabet, runes, which used to be very obscure, and now there's been a lot of books on it over the past couple of decades. And there was a magic associated with called Galdur, but there were other kinds of magic, and you'll see a term for a type of magic or sorcery throughout, and when I say these are like the sagas and the Old Norse texts, there's two called the Eddas, the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, which are probably the oldest stories or myths. That's where the myths come from. And they were all written down after the people weren't pagan anymore. So, you have to sort out what's true. But they mention a type of magic or sorcery called Sade or Sather. And no one's really sure what it was, quite frankly. So everyone kind of has their own idea of what Sade was. A lot of times it winds up being everything that isn't Galdur. But it does seem to have involved some type of trance state, or at least a number of the practices, because they have descriptions of people doing it. The thing is, there's a lot of descriptions of people doing rune magic, and it talks about them, cutting a stick and carving things into it, and because it's outward. But if someone's doing a trance working, you don't really know what's going on internally, so it's hard to know what they were doing because there's no description by onlookers. I think there's a couple of things when they'll talk about someone, covering themselves up with a cloak and lying, still for a long time, and then suddenly sitting up and yawning and then making this prophecy, which are, that's what the onlookers see. But it would be really nice to know what was going on in that worker's head when he was doing that. But of course, you don't know, so you kind of have to guess. But they use trance states for certain types of magic, and one type, like I said, it almost seems like a type of shape-shifting or something, because there are descriptions of magic workers going into trance state and an animal, they kind of have an animal symbol or self would go out and be fighting in a battle, like a bear or something, interfering with one side of a battle or the other, because that army had brought a sorceress with them.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
So that actually is visible, concrete, sending forth, or people would go into a trance state to try to find out like what happened to someone's 3 brothers that went to sea last year, and they don't know what happened to them. There's like a myth where someone does an operation to find that out. So I mean, there is, that is the idea that people would, using a trance state to go, to other places in this world to find things out. And I guess that's where I got the idea of doing something similar to try to reach the worlds of the gods or some of these other magical beings that they talk about.
Wow. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Eddie Connor.
And I'm Tony Sweet.
And we have with us author Alice Karlsdottir. She's the author of Norse Goddess Magic. It is trance work, mythology, and ritual. And we're curious, why do you include fairy tales among your sources of information?
Well, because I was trying to do not only scholar, like I've done a lot of research into Norse folklore, but I'm not an academic. Like I didn't get a doctorate in that. And there are a number of scholarly books on the Norse mythology and tradition. So, there was no point to just make it strictly objective. But I was, because I was using it religiously and not from an academic standpoint, I felt like I could use other sources of information. So I'm kind of trying to tap into the subjective side. And one of the things that really sparked my imagination before I actually did actual trances was reading like fairy tales and folklore, which I had been introduced to as a young child. But very often I was doing some kind of project where I was reading a lot of fairy tale books, not necessarily Norse ones even, but like just a lot of fairy tales for some kind of project I was working on unrelated to this. But I found that when I was doing, my magical and religious research, that my mind was just like, suddenly I had all these ideas about, what this goddess was like or something. It just seemed to spark my imagination. Mm-hmm. So I like to read the folklore too, just to kind of, it kind of puts you into that culture if you read the folklore of the culture you're working with. But it kind of jump starts whatever lets you go into a trance. Because I like to have some images and ideas and things stirring around before I do the trance working. It's like when someone, like in school, where they would ask you to write an essay about anything. It was always really hard. Like your teacher says, write it, 500 words about anything you want. And it's like you can't think of anything. But if they say, write about your favorite animal or something, it's like it's better. It's easier to. It's kind of easier to go there when you already have like some ideas in your head to kind of prime the pump, rather than just sitting in a vacuum and trying to have something happen, at least for me. So,
just out of curiosity, is it easier for you, Alice, to go into a trance inside, like in the concrete jungle, or is it easier for you to go into a trance outside, like in a forest?
Well, that is a good question. Probably I've done it inside mostly because I've lived in cities a lot. There's pros and cons. Of course, inside there's a lot of energy, especially in a city, and especially if you live in apartments or things. There's noise, and you are surrounded by concrete. And now there's like electronics, which I think really interfere with it. So I
do
use
too.
it for everything else. But so the forest is beautiful and natural and everything, but it's also filled with like bugs and, and rain and wet, because one of the things, like when I go into a trance, it's kind of like putting your body, like you're trying to take your attention away from your body. And so like if it's too hot or too cold or things are itching you or something, then you're suddenly thinking about your body, and you can't go into a trance state. So,
right.
So I don't know, it's nice. And I have done trance workings outside. There are stories that people would do what they call sitting out, where they go sit out in a lonely place for a long time to encounter a dead relative, to sit on the mound of their grave or something. So they would do that, and I've done that, and that can be very magical too. But for this particular type of trance, it does kind of add, like I said, that a lot of different distractions.
So do you think we only have about 4 minutes left, and I hate that this is already almost over, but do you feel that the work that you've done enhanced your intuitiveness, I guess, psychic ability? Because I think you have to have some sort of ability to do what you do.
I don't know if it enhanced it, but I think it made me trust it more.
Huh.
I've kind of, I grew up in a modern society where, that's, like, I loved fairy tales. I'm an actor. Like, I love, fiction and, make believe and all that stuff. But, like, you get to a certain age, it's like, well, this is not really real, And if you have that feeling about something, it's like, oh, that's just your imagination. You must think logically about all your problems. But now I know that that feeling is right a lot of the time, so...
Wow. I think every fairy tale, every story, fiction or not fiction, has some kind of correlation to reality, whether we see it or don't see it. And do you yourself have a favorite goddess?
I think Frigg is probably, or she's the one I felt closest to, although I feel like now I have a relationship with a number of gods and goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about Frigg that you are more attracted, I guess, or at least...
and it's funny, because she's like the mother, she's seen as a mother goddess. When I say Allmother, she wasn't actually called the Allmother in the myths, but I think in a lot of ways she functions as that, because she's the mother of a lot of the gods, and she's the goddess of homes and family and children. And I'm actually, I'm not married with a lot of children, and I do theater and weird stuff, and not, I don't seem very homemaking, but there is a part of me I like to kind of have my house in order and do the cooking and stuff. And there's an orderliness about her. She also is associated with spinning and weaving, and I think a number of other crafts, if you look at some of the German goddesses that are similar. And I really am into that kind of, arts and crafts stuff. And she's just very calm and peaceful and understanding, and I guess I'm kind of hyper sometimes, and I just found that a very good influence to contact, to kind of calm me down.
Even when you're speaking about her, you're carrying the frequency, your disposition, your tonal quality, the lyrical fluidity of your vocals literally just started to get in this wonderful, receptive, calm, meditative place.
Yeah, and Frigg is kind of like that.
I love that.
Well, this is great, and we hope that you come back and visit us again. If you have any new books, are you going to be writing any more books? Or
it takes me a long time, but yeah, I'm thinking of writing some more. I'm either going to continue writing about some different goddesses, or write about ritual theater.
Oh,
wow, that's great!
Ding ding ding! Ritual theater for 200.
Do you think I should write about
ritual theater?
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, because I love ritual. Ritual is part of a thing where you get into the rhythm of it, and it's a trigger for me. Like, I won't ever do an intuitive reading without doing my prayer, my little rituals that go with it. But with the theater, being a performer in the past, oh Lord, being an entertainer and a performer in the past, there is a marriage between those two worlds. I think it's important to have it.
And most theater grew out of ritual in the
Yeah.
beginning, if you read the history. So.
I love that. Thank you, Alice. You've been amazing.
You have been.
And patient. Thank you for, we were literally attacked by insects and everything. And you're just going along. Does that mean something, actually, now that I think about it?
Because they're gone now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll have to look that up.
Yeah, we'll have to look that
Alice,
up.
did you
I will say that my favorite god might be Loki.
Oh, Loki, yeah. Well, now
He's a god of mischief. So.
And everybody knows who Loki now is.
Well, they know who Marvel's Loki
Yes, right.
Not necessarily
not the real one. Well,
He
we
does
thank
cause
you.
disruptions, so that might have been the insect.
Wait till you see the video played back. Literally, it was like, what?
I kept looking over at Eddie like, what are you doing? Like, waving your arms. Anyway, all right, Alice, we thank you so much. And if
Thank
you
you.
guys want to go
Thank
to
you.
her,
I have enjoyed it.
oh, wait, we totally enjoyed it. And please go look at her. I think you have a couple places that people
Yes.
can find you. You can go to mad-alice.blogspot.com, or you can go to her website, and that's just Alice Karlsdottir.
Karlsdottir. Yeah, and that is K-A. Well,
That's not a website. That's a Facebook.
It's Facebook
Right,
page,
that's a Facebook.
Facebook/Alice Karlsdottir. And we have all of the information up on the screen so that everybody that's watching can actually spell it correctly.
Yes.
And I believe I have an author page at Inner Traditions Bear Company.
Yep,
as
we sure
well.
do. We got people.
Nice.
We got that website up there too. But thank you so much, and
Thanks,
come back and
Alice.
see us. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Alice. Bye bye. All right. Well, another great show, and I hope you guys learned some stuff, and I know we sure did.
What'd you learn?
Huh? Well, I learned that Eddie doesn't like bugs flying around his face.
Well, Tony doesn't like bugs flying around his face.
No, I usually eat them for good protein.
That's why he's got a tongue like a giraffe, y'all. It's like an ant eater, not
But
an uncle
we
eater.
we want to thank. I've been getting a lot of emails from people suggesting guests for us, Eddie, and so we want to thank you guys. They say, well, you guys mention it, so we want to suggest. And I've had probably 5 in the last week, and so Eddie and I will look at those and see if we can get some of those people on. And Wana is an Aboriginal leader from Australia, and they want to try to get him on the show. So I would love to
Nice.
have him on the show. We've talked about Native Americans, so we need to talk about the
Yeah, we
Aboriginal
do, especially still what's going on with the pipeline right
Yeah.
now. They did stop some of the demolition
Oh, they
on it
did?
in a section.
people. Oh,
We're told in a section so that the public would back off and the country would leave them alone, but it's just in a section.
well, we need to get more people.
I know.
We need to get some people.
I
on
saw
for
a
that.
thing on Facebook because if you see it on Facebook, it's got to be true, right?
Oh, sure.
But it's very poignant. If anybody in this country were trying to take that pipeline and take it through Arlington Cemetery,
Oh my God, that would be up in arms.
so why isn't it the same for these Native American
Leave them
communities?
alone.
That's right. We've
hurt
messed
them a lot
more
enough.
than any other group in the world.
Yes. So leave them alone. All right. Well, we are out. We want to thank you guys for tuning in. Come back next week. It's a psychic call-in show.
Yes, it is. William Constantine and Rachel Angeline are going to be here. And the first 30 minutes of the 2-hour show is going to be us getting to meet and greet William, getting a little bit of background information from him. He's coming up from New Mexico, I believe.
Just to see us.
Yes, and he's going to be live in studio along with Rachel Angeline. And then we're going to pick up and do some readings.
That sounds good. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you next week right here on Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
See you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Hey, thank you for listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. Make sure you go to our iTunes page. Just type in Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. Listen to us on iHeartRadio. Again, Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. And go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. So please support our sponsors and make sure you listen to us every Friday right here on Universal Broadcasting Network from 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Until then, have a good week.